Hey everyone, welcome to day 3 of the holiday series for 2017. Today I'm walking you through on how I created my personal Christmas cards this year for family and friends. I mass produced over 50 cards, so after a few years of doing this, I've kind of broken it down and I thought I'd give you guys some tips and tricks. So today I'm starting out with Clearly Besotted Basic Stripes stamp set. It's an older stamp set, but that's okay. There's plenty of stamp sets nowadays that have stripes in it that you could use. I tend to do these in stages and I like to make the most of my time. So one night while my daughter was at dance class for an hour, I took my paper trimmer, I took all of my paper, and I trimmed down all of my paper. I did all 50 some odd card bases. This is Nina Desert Storm in a 100 pound cardstock. And it's an A2 size card, so it's cut down at 4 1/4 and scored at 5 1/2. I did that, and I also cut down my front panels, which I showed earlier in the green and red. That's measured to 4 inches by 5 1/4, so I have a mat. Now what I tend to do is I use a really high quality sturdy card base, and then my mat on the front of my card I use a not so expensive cardstock because I want to save as much of my good products as possible, especially when you're creating such a large number like 50. I really focus on the card base and make sure that's sturdy, and the paper on top, since I'm doing something very basic this year, does not have to be a super high quality cardstock. I'm actually using a paper pack that you can find at your local craft store, and I'm just matching the cardstock with colors that I have in my stash. I'm using Simon Says Stamp Midnight Green, and then I'm also using Lawn Fawn Cranberry ink, which matches the red perfectly. I could have used Versamark ink, which is a watermark ink, but it tends to dry a little bit slower, and I wanted something that was going to dry quicker. So that's why I'm going with dye-based inks. So I've lined up my stripes on my Misty tool. This is something that I haven't had in past years. This is the first year I'm using it to create my Christmas cards. It is essential in my crafting stash. I can't imagine creating cards without it now that I've created so many with them. So I suggest investing in one if you can. You can certainly just use a clear acrylic block, but this Misty tool saved me this year with my card design that I was going through. I wanted to go with plaid. It seems to be this big new thing this year. I've always loved plaid. I've never attempted it. This is the first year that I was going with it. So I'm taking 3 basic stripes. I'm stamping my card panel, the front of my card panel, one way with this green ink. I'm then rotating it and aligning it down the bottom. I'm using my microfiber cloth that you guys have seen in so many videos recently to really help me get an even impression across all my stamps when stamping with the Misty tool. And then I'm sliding my card base or my card front down a little bit, and I'm using the guides of these stamps that you can see off to the side from stamping the previous time, and just using that as a guide. I did draw in some pencil lines when I started before I rotated the card front, but now I'm just using those as a guide, and I'm going to go ahead and stamp them again. The first couple will take you a couple minutes to get into a rhythm, and then once that happens, it'll flow. Yes, it's going to take you time to stamp 50 card fronts, but once you get into a rhythm and you know exactly how you want it to look, it goes by rather quickly. Now, I didn't get even impressions across the board. I was totally okay with that. I felt like it gave it more of a distressed feel, and I'm not going to worry about it. I have 50 cards to make, and I have 2 very small kids, so I was just going through it quickly. Next, I wanted to create a customized sentiment, so I went ahead and trimmed down all of these white cardstock pieces. Again, this is not some heavy duty cardstock. It's some basic white cardstock you can get at your local craft store. And I made the word Mary out of Lawn Fawn's Clark ABC stamp set. I wanted to do a little bit of print mixed with a little bit of script for my sentiment, which is the main focal point on my card front. So I'm taking the Lawn Fawn Cranberry ink. I've positioned my stamp to read Mary exactly where I want it on my Misty tool, and I'm just double inking. I wasn't getting a perfect impression every time, so I just went with a double ink for each time. And using this Misty tool again saved me because I just place the piece of cardstock in the corner, I stamp once, re-ink, stamp twice, it's done. I'm not worrying about not having it lined up perfectly. It really truly is a lifesaver. So once I've gone ahead and I've stamped all of these pieces, I put it aside and I'm working on the next section. I like to do these in sections. I cut all my stuff, I score all my stuff, I stamp one thing all 50 times, and then I move on to the next thing. So once I've stamped all of the Mary panels, I went with this glitter cardstock again from the craft store. This cardstock was very, very thin, and I thought that maybe that would be better because it wouldn't be so bulky on my card front. It doesn't rub off, it's really fine glitter, and I thought it would work well. Lesson learned that when you're using a very intricate die and you're using very thin cardstock and you don't have a metal shim, it can take you quite a while to poke out all of the negative pieces. So my advice is either have a metal shim or use a little bit higher quality cardstock to be sure that you're not wasting time, as I did, poking out all of the bits and pieces. But you live and you learn. So I wanted to apply adhesive onto this glitter cardstock to really make the putting together of my card as quick and easy as possible. So I'm taking the stick-it adhesive, I've cut it down to 12 inches so that it matches the length of this cardstock, and this is just a scraper that I have in my crafting stash. I'm pulling the backing off and just applying it. I like to use a bone folder or a scraper to really push the adhesive onto the paper to make sure I have a really firm contact. So once I've done that, I'm actually going to cut down this panel, and I'm cutting little strips to measure to the size of the die cut that I'll be using for the rest of my sentiment. Now, I did try and just use a larger panel, and what I found was that every time I cut the next die cut in that panel, I just moved my die down a little bit. When I was using the plates, it was really pushing the glitter paper all back together again. So the pieces that I had die cut were kind of fusing back in, and it was giving me a really tough time to separate. So what I did is I just cut little strips that measured the size of my sentiment, like you'll see here. And I'm putting this Christmas die. This happens to be from Simon Says Stamp. It's called Christmas Blessings. And because I don't have a metal shim, I'm just making my own shim with some cardstock that I folded over a couple times. It looks really flimsy. That's because this is about halfway through my process, but I could have easily just thrown it away and put it aside. So I am running this through twice. I'm feeding it through once forward and then coming back through a second time. So you see here it die cuts. I'm just putting it off to the side. I'm not even popping it out of this glitter strip, and I'm going back through and doing all the cutting. Once I've done all the cutting, I'll go ahead and sit there and take my time. I tend to put something on the TV while I'm taking apart all the pieces, poking out all the negative parts of the die cut. It just entertains you, and if you're going to be sitting there doing this anyways, you might as well be entertained for a while. You'll also see to the right, I have all my Mary stamped and they're off. So now it's time to assemble all of my cards. Now, for this particular example, I'm doing the flag banner on this one and assembling it all. But in reality, I did sit again while I was watching something or playing with my kids. My daughter was coloring and I was doing this. I cut flag ends off of the white strip all at once and then put it aside. That way when it came to mass assembling, I could do it all at once. So I'm going ahead and applying the Mary strip onto my card front. I'm taking some scissors and trimming off the side. I've already applied the Christmas die cut onto the card panel. I'm then just going to use some basic snail adhesive onto the back, apply that down, and then I felt like it needed a little bit something extra. So instead of using some enamel dots, I'm just using some stickles in the Christmas red to apply some dots. I know that Nouveau drops are a really big thing right now. If you have those, you can certainly use those. I literally did all of the stickles on the front of my card and pushed it off to the side. And I just, once the card was completely assembled, I just did all the dots and laid it out on my dining room table. And that completes my card for today. It was a really easy card if you're just creating one. If you need to mass produce, it comes together incredibly quickly. Here you'll see the card with the stickles completely dry on it. Again, just something clean, simple, and classic. Your mass-produced Christmas cards do not have to be some crazy wild thing, unless you want it to and you have plenty of time to spend on it. Unfortunately, I do not, so I really focus on making a clean and simple design that is still beautiful and that everyone will enjoy. The last piece of advice that I have is that when I create my Christmas cards, I tend to use my ATG because it's the most economical with adhesives and it's actually rather quickly. Again, I really hope you guys enjoyed this card. I will see you guys real soon for day 4. And as always, there's a link down below to my blog with a list of all the supplies used on this card.